culture is becoming more pluralistic, more global, more open. How marvelous that yesterday, Warithuddin Muhammad, a great Imam of Islam, native-born person, was talking in Nashville. Could you imagine 50 years ago, a man of color, a man of African American heritage, giving an important address like that and having full respect and having people attending from all different cultural backgrounds, so that we're grateful that there's an opening, and we think that is rooted in the American Constitution and the American Bill of Rights. There's something very special about this country, the potential here. Now, we haven't lived up to our potential. We've made serious errors as a nation over the years, as every nation does. But there's something very special here. My sheikh, who came from Istanbul, fell in love with America because of the religious freedom and because of the openness of the heart of the people that he encountered. Of course, he was a radiant person who tended to encounter very, very open-hearted people, or if someone wasn't open-hearted, they became open-hearted rather quickly in his presence. But nonetheless, he fell in love with this country, and actually taught some of us who were born here to appreciate it more, and to realize that we were a little complacent about what we have here. The founding fathers were of, I suppose, a largely Christian background, but they had a tremendous esoteric input from Freemasonry and other esoteric lines of thinking, which is evident in some of the way the documents are framed. And there's some studies now on the esoteric studies of that the framers of the Constitution had. And Freemasonry was one conduit in which Islamic wisdom flowed into European culture. So that you might even say there's kind of Islamic principles of functioning in the framing of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. There were also Native American principles, the federations, the tribal federations. The principle of federation was something that had been developed in the Native American setting, and the founding fathers were well aware of that also. So a lot of wonderful things came together in the founding of the country, and the brothers and sisters from Africa who came under tragic circumstances, nonetheless, brought Islamic sensibilities too from Islamic Africa, and human history is always tinged with the tragic, with the negative, because human history is a field of egos, and some very powerful egos just trying to ravage everything, basically. So but since human history is just the surface of reality, and underneath is the divine will, which is all merciful and all just, unfolding, with nothing impeding it. I mean, how could a personal will of some ego, even a million egos or a billion egos, how could that impede the unfolding of the divine will? So that underneath all of this is fresh, clear water. So like the desert, if you look at a dark, dry wash, you think I'm going to die of thirst here. But the people who know dig down, and a couple of feet they find the clear water. So that human history is that way. I'm very honored and happy, and the person who made this possible is sitting over there, to be invited to an institution of learning like this, to give a small presentation. Because I want to, if Allah permits it, I would like to give a drop back to our culture through institutions of learning and higher learning and places where studies of religion are made in goodwill and openness of spirit. I'm not here to gather dervishes or to set up some sort of movement. I'm just here to share. And I myself have a PhD in world religion from Columbia University, so I've benefited from the institutions of higher learning and from scholars who have studied religion. Now, my temperament was to plunge into the experience and practice of the religions, and that's what that was. Sometimes my professors thought that was a little strange, but probably not anymore. I mean, that was 20 years ago. Professors were that way. That they wanted to maintain clear lines between academic studies and actual experience of the traditions. And there are probably a lot of sociological reasons for that we could explore. But I did go against the tide when I was in graduate school. I was actually practicing traditions and seeking out the people from the cultures where these traditions were indigenous and finding and then receiving teaching from them and instructions. Strangely enough, I first came into Christianity in a real living way through a man named Vanderbilt Sr., who was a Episcopal minister in South Dakota, Native Americans from Sioux, from the Lakota people. Some of you may know the writings of his son, Vanderbilt Jr., kind of radical Native American thinker. But so up to that point, I hadn't been really a participant in the Christian sacraments. My family had been sort of like free thinkers, and so that was when I was 19. So we say I was even introduced to Christianity by a non-European, from a non-European perspective, because the Vanderbilt Sr., although he was an Episcopal minister in full standing, in fact he was what we would call an archdeacon. He practiced the spirituality of Native American spirituality in the context of Christian spirituality, and it wasn't like exactly like learning Christianity just from your local Episcopal minister. It had a special flavor to it. I haven't even really begun to talk yet. That's not rolling, but just introductory remarks that are coming to my mind and heart. That Vanderbilt's grandfather, his father had been also an Episcopal minister, and his grandfather, his father was the first Native American Christian missionary to his own people. And his father, his statue is in the National Cathedral of Washington. And the way it happened was something interesting. Because usually we think of missionaries as being maybe interrupting the flow of the native cultures. I mean, 50 years ago or 100 years ago, missionizing was something that's completely accepted by everybody. It's a very natural thing to do. You just go in there and they're heathen people, and you're just making them into believers. And this attitude of Christians and Muslims. But in contemporary times, we begin to appreciate that native cultures have a tremendous spiritual richness to them. And you don't just go in and destroy all that and put something in its place. You go in and there's a kind of a cooperation, spiritual cooperation. So for instance, the noble prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace, he took the Kaaba and the pilgrimage to the Kaaba and everything that existed there. He saw with his inspired eye that this had recently had reference to the prophet Abraham, upon him be peace, that it had been part of the prophetic lineage, and then all that had been forgotten. And he didn't, take apart the Kaaba stone by stone. He didn't even take the black stone away from the Kaaba. Even though some of his companions said, well, that black stone is too much connected with like the pre-Islamic worship that went on here. We should like throw that thing away. He didn't know to throw it away. And so the black stone, which was a very sacred and power object of the pre-Islamic worship there, he kept it, and now and he saw with his clairvoyant vision, as it were, that it too was connected with a very primordial spiritual event, and so he saw that it was of value, and then he kept it. They say that there was as you may know in Islam, there's a prescription against paintings and iconography of that kind. But there's a tradition that inside the Kaaba there was a fresco or an icon of the Virgin Mary carrying the Christ child. And he said, leave it. So that the idea of missionizing, where you go in and you destroy what's there and you bring your own doctrine, is almost it sounds to me like Marxism. Just go in there and blow up the monasteries in Tibet, or turn all the churches in Russia into office buildings. But that's not the way of spirituality. Spirituality goes with a sensitive eye. It sees that the Holy Spirit, or let's say the life of guidance, has flowed through the ancient peoples of this planet. And as my Sheikh used to say, the world is very old. I'm afraid that modern people, we don't get that, we don't have that sense to think that like sort of started in the 50s. And for younger, it started in the 60s or something, for the younger ones. So that what was causing all this to be unveiled, this is a Sufi story, by the way. When you tell Sufi stories, it doesn't have to be about something in the past or something written in a book. It doesn't have to be a story about a king and a prince and a hidden sage, like you read in books. But it can be just like what I'm talking about now. You begin to see veils within veils, and you're removing them, and suddenly you're seeing new perspectives and new vistas that are unexpected. So what caused this whole digression, and my Sheikh from Istanbul used to tell long stories that would take at least half an hour to tell, and it would interrupt him in the middle and say, this reminds me of another story. He'd tell another long story, and then come back right to where he stopped before and then start the previous story. It's like the Shakespeare's, the play within the play. So this is what's this. And then psychologically, he wanted to entrap the conscience of the king by this play within the play. So this dream within the dream, this way of thinking is what releases certain wisdom or such things that are hidden within us, or blockages that are there. But also, I don't have a clairvoyant mind at all, so I don't know the story of the future, except that they're humanity. I'm just speaking to humanity of people. But I'm sure that already a few of the things I've said probably have helped people. They have helped me. Our Sheikh used to say that I listened to myself talk. Because he didn't plan what he was going to say. He never said the same thing twice. So why not listen and learn, even if you happen to be the one who's talking? So that how this all started was how the father of Vanderbilt became the first missionary to his people. It was how did he become a Christian? Was he sort of a rice Christian? I mean, did the people come and establish a mission and give the Native Americans food so they would come and get attached to the mission? Or how did it happen? This is the way it happened. He was a medicine man of great. His father was a medicine man of great stature, named Tipi Sapa, black Tipi. And as in Islam, black is a very, very high color, high spiritual, mystic color, at least in Lakota way. Some of you may have heard of Black Elk, Hakasa. There's a book, great books by Black Elk, which are very useful, interesting books. So his father was a great medicine man of his people, great shaman, as they say today. But I would hasten to say, let's say, a man of God. But that you might say that's a misapplication because that's a reference to maybe Christian or Islamic things. But if you use medicine man, it can also be sort of like, or a shaman is sort of like one step below the real people of God who are the Jews, the Christians, the Muslims, and so on. And that these native people, they just have medicine. And so we have to be very careful about that. That he was a real man of God. So his father was a real man of God. And so he began there was a little Christian chapel on the not the reservation, but I don't think there was reservations at the time, but that area. Maybe there were reservations. And he just liked to ride his horse by there every Sunday morning because he liked the singing, because they sang in the Lakota language. They translated the hymnal into Lakota, which was fabulous, because if you ever look at the hymnal, that's where the deep teachings are. Some of those hymns are pure Sufi. They're very profound mystical hymns. So from the pulpit, you may be getting a very conventional kind of Christianity, but when you sing the hymns, you're getting the real teachings. And what's more, you're singing them, so therefore, like in our order, we sing mystic hymns. That's where we get our best teachings. Because when you're singing, as a modern psychologist would say, a different side of your brain is functioning. It's soaking in a different way when you're chanting, when you're singing. So that he would come and he would enjoy the Lakota singing. And one day, he heard a single line from a hymn that just struck him like unfortunately, I don't know what it was. But it's different for everyone. Lightning strikes different for everyone. And suddenly he realized that there was more going on here than he thought. It wasn't just like enjoying the singing. That he said there was something incredible here in this humble little place. So he didn't ask anyone, he didn't say anything. He just kept riding by every Sunday again, waiting to hear that line again. And I don't know how long it takes, 6 months or whatever, till someone to go back to the same hymn that you sung. And when he heard it the second time, he rode right up to the chapel in the middle of the service, left his horse outside, walked right down the middle of the aisle, interrupted everything, walked right up in front of him and says, I want to become a Christian. So you tell me whether that was the imposing Christianity on a noble ancient people, or whether it was unveiling. So Islam also has is the further extension of exactly that same blessed revelation that we call Christianity, that we call Judaism. And so therefore Islam can unveil in that same way, can attract the heart of a person, can attract the heart of advanced spiritual practitioners, not just people who may be unstable emotionally or socially deprived, and sort of go in there and say, well, no, I'm going to give you a bunch of material things, and also you take the religion along with it, sort of like a barter situation. Islam, just as Christianity did in that instance, can come in and just by singing a line of a mystic hymn, someone could be united. That we sing in our order. I burst into the flames of love. I became drunk on the mystery of love. Two mystic lovers circling the holy teacher banquet of love in the paradise of love. I am truth, cries the wisest of the wise. My body is consumed in the radiance of love. The light of essence shining from the holy teacher merges me with the sovereign of love. The light of essence coming from the holy teacher merges me with the sovereign of love. Left to be nothing. Ignite person. And strangely enough, a friend of mine, who's a Christian, is also a member of our Dervish order, because in our order we accept members of all the noble traditions, and some of them end up also embracing Islam, but we always feel that's between Allah and the soul of the person. And as my sheikh used to say, when someone said, I want to embrace Islam, he'd say, well, we already have 1 billion Muslims. We don't need more. That was his own. Instead of saying, oh, great, don't come over here briefly, I'll give you the Shahada. Well, you can just say something like that, playful, to make sure that people are coming from their own free will, and that they don't feel that there's some sort of pressure, some sort of conversion pressure being put out. So this Dervish sister, Lufia, was discussing in her church what Pentecost is. Actually, today is Pentecost in the Eastern Orthodox Church, I believe. So I guess Pentecost happened a week or so ago. A week ago. So today is definitely Eastern Church Pentecost. So she and her church were talking about it, and she doesn't discuss her Sufism, with the members of her congregation. She doesn't want to freak anybody out. The Holy Prophet upon BPs who used to give certain permission to certain people to conceal their Islam, their connection with him until the right time it would be unveiled. But there's no insistence in Sufism or Islam that you've got to go around with a big badge on you and saying, this is it, this is what I am. It should shine through you. It should shine through the pores of your skin. It doesn't have to come through like badges or anything like that. So that people were arguing, what is Pentecost? What's going on? And suddenly she just sang that hymn. Everyone said, that's it. Where'd you get that hymn? It's a mystic hymn from someplace. I personally claim to love. I think they had, and the church had that printed and blown up in big letters, and they've got it like hanging on the side of their church now. Okay, now the talk should begin. And then because I wanted that was just like to relax all of us and touch some bases. But now I really want to give a formal talk talking from Quranic roots. It's because we always turn to Quran for our illumination. And the Sufis or mystics of Islam are even more connected with Quran than other Muslims are. It's not less connected, it's more. And the Sufis have such intimacy with Quran that they're able to see very special things in there which other Muslims might not see right away. Mawlana Jalaluddin Rumi, the great saint and poet, mystic poet, said that the Quran is like a bride. She won't lift her veil for anyone but her husband. So that intimacy with Quran, spiritual intimacy, is different than just scholarship. And so the Sufis longing and praying and practicing to achieve that mystical intimacy with the Quran. So certain unveilings occur to them. So this is a book I wrote, which I hope all of you will get a copy for yourself and send a copy to your congressman. Send a copy to someone who was in the Gulf. I've been longing to try to get this book into the public eye because I think it could be so useful as a bridge. But I guess the harmony of the individual will of the infinite divine is kind of a generalized term. It's not really a specific historical term, particularly since in Quranic Muslims, when they think of the prophet Moses, they think, what a great Muslim. And they're not saying that he was a follower of the prophet Muhammad. They're saying he was a great lover of God. And the name Allah they would use as the name for the one God, so that Abraham or Noah would call, oh Allah. So that it's hard for us, probably from Jewish or Christian backgrounds, many of us are, I can see there are some people from Islamic background here, it's hard for us to understand the kind of universality that a Muslim feels about global religion. Now, I'm not saying Muslims are also, they've got egos like everyone else does. And so ego can come in and sort of claim Islam in a very narrow sense. And we know that phenomenon. All of us have that in ourselves. I'm not pointing my finger at someone else. I'm indicating that myself. I can always feel the pressure of the ego there wanting to lay claim to something. Say, it's mine. So that's why we say, Alhamdulillah. All praises are due to Allah. It's Allah's. It's Allah's religion. It's Allah's plan. It's Allah's dream. The devotion of a person is between their soul and their soul and Allah. It's not my responsibility to go intervene. Okay, so here, this passage is trying to maybe indicate something of that universal Islam. and then we'll open for some questions. There exists only one supreme source, one inexhaustible power, calling itself Allah, and by countless other beautiful divine names. There's never any sense that there's only one name of God, or even just 99 names of God. There's an infinite number of names of God that have been revealed throughout the history. There exists only one supreme source, one inexhaustible power, calling itself Allah, and by infinite, beautiful divine names. The profoundly living one, the life beyond time that never diminishes. The one reality never sleeps, nor even for a moment rests its embracing awareness. To the one alone belongs the emanation of planetary existence and the 7 higher planes of being, as spreading rays of sunlight belong to a single sun. There is no being who can turn toward the ever-present source. Well, first, before I go on, let me just chant that little section in Arabic. I forgot that's called the Ayatul Kursi. Alhamdulillah. It just happened I happened to choose this. So just to get the idea of the resonance, the Arabic Quran is something that's really untranslatable. It's an initiatory. The resonance of the Arabic language in Quran is initiatory. Arabic itself is not a holy language, just as an ordinary earthly human language. It's only the Quran, the Arabic of Quran, that has become a vessel for spiritual blessing. So that sounds like this. Allahu la ilaha illahu al-hayyul qayyum la ta'khudhuhu sinatun wa la nawm lahu ma fi samawati wa ma fi al-ard man dha alladhi yashfa'u indahu illa bi'idhnihi ya'lamu ma bayna aydihim wa ma khalfahum wa la yuhituna bi shay'in min ilmihi illa bima sha'a wasi'a kursiyyuhu as-samawati wal ard وَلَا يَعُودُهُ حِفْظُهُمَا وَهُوَ الْعَلِيُّ الْعَظِيمُ. صدق الله. There exists only one supreme source, one inexhaustible power, calling itself Allah, the profoundly living one, the life beyond time that never diminishes. The one reality never sleeps, nor even for a moment rests its embracing awareness. To the one alone belong the emanation of planetary existence and the 7 higher planes of being, as spreading rays of sunlight belong to a single sun. There is no being who can turn toward the ever-present source in prayer or contemplation, except through the power and love that flow from the source itself. It's a very important point, because turning toward the ever-present source, that's what religion is all about. It's turning to the source. That here, the Quran explains that no being can turn to the source except through the power and love that flow from the source itself. So by definition, religion does not belong to human beings. It belongs to God. And that would be a big step, if we could make that step, to stop appropriating religion for human beings, or for culture, or Turkey, or Morocco. That let it be Allah, Allah's religion. Since the ultimate source abides beyond time, it always remains perfectly aware of what causes proceed and what results follow from each event. Human beings can comprehend nothing of this encompassing awareness, save what Allah Most High transmits to them as gifts of grace. Very, very important. Our spiritual insights, our spiritual gifts, our abilities. It's not like science. We have a science is that human beings are very bright and they're getting smarter every day and they're building bigger telescopes and they're learning more. But that's not the way. It is in spiritual knowledge and not even in earthly knowledge either. We feel that Allah is the one permitting the people to build the bigger telescopes. not some sort of big project of human intelligence. Because human intelligence, when it works on its own, it becomes shaitanic. It becomes demonic. And we've seen enough suffering and enough oppression in the history of humanity to confirm this. That what comes to us through different sources of knowledge, all the way from radio telescopes to understanding Quran and all of that, it's coming as a gift of grace from Allah. Human beings can comprehend nothing of this encompassing awareness save what Allah Most High transmits to them as gifts of grace. All creation, including planetary and heavenly planes, is the brilliant throne of Allah. That's what we're looking at. It's not hidden someplace out there, up there. With the eyes of the heart open. All creation, heavenly and planetary planes. All creation, including planetary and heavenly planes, is the brilliant throne of Allah. To sustain and protect this vast manifestation of divine energy involves no effort at all for the original source, who is supremely transcendent and who subsists solely as radiance. Just proclaims people the wrong guide. My beloved Muhammad, there should never be the slightest compulsion brought to bear upon any person to walk the exalted way of Islam. And you can see why we're so sensitive about that, why the true Muslim is so sensitive about that. And how, for instance, in our order we have Christian Sufis and Jewish Sufis. Because if the previous election, if Allah is, if the Prophet is showing so much respect to the Christian desert fathers and desert mothers, that same respect for the people of the book is still due. It doesn't mean that we accept everything about contemporary Christianity as if it's gospel. We have to be critical. We have to be critical. So that the no compulsion is and Muslims read this over day after day after day, but the ego still functions. And we have to be realistic about this, about ourselves too. Like we're parents. And we have young kids. Every day we wake up and say, I'm not going to compel my kids to do things. That's not the way you educate a child. We have the perfect understanding of that. Then the moment something comes up, we come down heavy on the kids. Say, don't do that, and don't ask me why. So that's the ego function. So ego functions in world religions too. We'll be honest about that. So it's a path. None of us can claim to have absorbed the beauty of this verse, that there should be no compulsion. In Islam, because the ego is pure compulsion. It's compulsiveness itself. So none of us are free from that ego yet. It's a long process. I noticed that in the middle of the prayers, I said to one of my to Muhammad's nephew, his son Kamil, tough on his kid, he yells at his kids, which is only natural. Young guys, like 4 kids, it's not easy. I said, if you were making the salah, if you were making the prayers, and the kid ran across, would you interrupt your prayers and shout at the kid that way? He said, absolutely. I said, okay, then why are you just that way during the prayers? Why do you try to be that way all the time? And he's a very good practitioner, a very good observer, so he understood exactly what I was talking about. But that doesn't mean that he changed overnight. I mean, it doesn't mean I've changed overnight. It's a long process. My beloved Muhammad, there should never be the slightest compulsion brought to bear upon any person to walk the exalted way of Islam. Allow humanity to be attracted spontaneously to Islam by its utmost clarity. For Islam simply makes clear the truth that there can be only one source. This truth dissolves the primal error that turns away from the ultimate source by mistaking various limited views to be ultimate. So it's a path of truth where simply the contemplation of the truth itself is the active principle which dissolves error. You don't have to get out a stick and start trying to find error and thrash it. You just stay with the truth. You stay with the affirmation of Allah, and gradually that dissolves error in its obvious forms and in its subtle forms too. Because the subtle forms of error are so subtle that we could it's like finding a needle in a haystack. We could never clear ourselves of error by mental process. So we have to have this principle of la ilaha illallah, this truth, the fact that unity, the truth of unity, is what gradually, like Moses wanting to piece through that, you kind of tree into a poisoned water. What was that in the gospel in the Torah? People are wandering through the desert, and there's no drinkable water. He cuts a certain tree, throws it in, and it purifies the water. So that's what this affirmation of divine unity is. It purifies. But not overnight. There's plenty of people who are repeating that sincerely, like and they're full of ego and full of they even oppress people in the name of God. So the error is defined here as mistaking various limited views to be ultimate. So it's not just like saying, well, your view is wrong. It's limited. And if you take the limited as something ultimate, that's what error is. So that this is a subtle form of error. It's not like saying when I look at this table, oh, this is made out of gold. So no, that's wrong. It's made out of wood or mica. That would be an obvious error. That would be fairly easy to deal with. But a spiritual error is something where you're taking a limited view, which is true. Yes, the table is made out of wood, but you're saying it's ultimate, and that's all this table is. And then an atomic physicist will say, no, this is atoms. This is not. If you look deeper into this phenomenon, you'll see something completely different. So spiritually, that way. And when we cry out, Allahu Akbar, Allah is always greater. It's really the imperative in Arabic. It's the this is to say that the divine reality, the supreme reality, is always greater than whatever understanding you may have of it. So if Muslims who cry out Allahu Akbar all the time would really take that teaching seriously, then they would realize that their own limited views of Islam may be correct as far as they go, but they're still limited. And if you take a limited view for the ultimate experience, that is error. Or in Islam, they call it shirk. Very powerful and painful word. You don't want to get involved in shirk. This truth dissolves the primal error that turns away from the ultimate source by mistaking various limited views of the ultimate. Whoever ceases to rely on any either, on any limited human understanding, and relies for strength solely on the limitless source who calls itself Allah, has grasped the most trustworthy support, the clear, indestructible essence of Islam. So that, let's say, Muslims could be together at a conference. Maybe there are Christians there, or maybe there are different kinds of Muslims. They could be arguing. I mean, it's perfectly legitimate to have a difference of opinion or something. Islam is not a cult where everyone has to hold exactly the same point of view. But after the argument, maybe it gets very heated, then you hear the Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, you hear the call to prayer, which begins by this affirmation, hey, Allah is always greater. Whatever you're doing, whatever you're engaged in, when you're arguing, whatever you're doing, listen, Allah is always greater. And then everyone, alhamdulillah, they put down their books, they put down everything. They take the noble ablutions of Islam and they renew their ablution, and they make the prayer. And at that point, they are relying only on the ultimate source. But when they came back to the prayers, then they'll start the argument again. But that's all right. That's the process. But the prayers of Islam are a very great sacrament because they permit 5 times a day the opportunity to drop all of our finite perceptions and understandings and go. And so that, and it's like any sacrament, it's kind of miraculous to see what happens there. People put down their machines out or whatever, and they make the prayers. And then they pick up their guns against it, or maybe you have to take up your gun in certain places. But in the time of those prayers, this what I call the essence of Islam is available. So we're not talking about just some Sufi mystic someplace, that maybe they're someone in the desert someplace who actually experiences this. No, every single person who makes the prayers at least has an element of this experience of whoever ceases to rely on any idol, on any limited human understanding, and relies for strength solely on the limitless source who calls itself Allah, has grasped the most trustworthy support, the clear and indestructible essence of Islam. And other great noble traditions have their sacramental ways to do this too. There's no way that it wouldn't be Islamic to say that God can only reveal himself through this Allah, through Islam. That the whole world is full of ayats or signs of God's existence for those who have eyes to see. Islam is always repeating this. Okay, the last paragraph is stay with me. Allah Most Wise hears inwardly the spoken and unspoken prayers and perceives intimately the open and hidden motivations of all beings. Allah Most Merciful gives the perfect guidance and full protection of His divine friendship to those who affirm the source of love with every breath. Those who live the life of constant spiritual affirmation, Allah Most High brings forth from the shadow realm of subjective impulses and limited concepts and cultural norms and ideas in vogue. Brings them forth from this shadow realm into the clear light of the source. But those who turn away from the source of light, who for guidance and protection rely on the graven images of limitation. Graven images are not just things that you put up on the wall, that look like pictures. Any form of imposed limitations is a graven image, including the ego itself. So that some of the mystics say, if you still think you exist, you're idolatry. But those who turn away from the source of life, who for guidance and protection rely on the graven images of limitation, are drawn from the clarity of revelation into the realm of shadows, and will inevitably experience the splendor of Allah as blinding fire. It doesn't mean that there's material fire there. It's the splendor of Allah. If your heart and being are not clear enough, you're going to into that divine light. It's going to be painful, and you're going to immediately interpret it as fire. That's what hellfire is. It's not some sort of horrible furnace of torture designed by God, made by God. The torture comes from human being himself. So sometimes if you ever lie down in a nice hot bath, and you turn on the water, and it's the cold water, but you put your toe under it, your system does a peculiar thing, and it feels like it's scalding, burning hot, even though it's cold. So that because I think it has to do with the expectation. You're lying in this hot water. It's kind of a weird sort of thing. So that's, to use a very mundane example, but that's what happens in hell. The soul goes, and they're surrounded by the negativity, by the fire that they've created in their own life, by their own negativity, by their own denial of the deeds of others. And so therefore they experience this divine splendor, which the lovers of God experience as paradise. They experience that very same divine splendor as fire, as fiery bonds, as fiery food that you eat, as molten copper that you're drinking, because they've been thirsty people of faith tonight. And so they build up all those associations. So my final prayer is that we not take this as an intellectual event, and we went to a lecture on Islam and Christianity, but that whether we're Christians or Muslims or Jews or whatever, that we should go forward with our process of purification so that we don't seriously misunderstand reality and thereby cause suffering to ourselves and others. May we close with the Surah Fatiha, the opening Surah Quran. Fatiha, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-siratal mustaqim. As-siratal ladzina an'amta 'alayhim. Ghayril maghdubi 'alayhim waladdallin. Amin. Ya Sultan Muhammad al-Hijrah. Ya Sultan Ahmad al-Taslim. Ya Sultan Ashkar. Greetings to all of the spiritual guides, all of the divine messengers, all of the inheritors of the world, of the prophets, all of the sincere practitioners, all of the sincere souls, and to everyone who's even loved selflessly